Pokemon Day is right around the corner, with a Pokemon Presents stream to boot. Today, I'll be breaking down what I expect to see at this event, and some of the things I don't think that we'll see. I'm not expecting to get everything right today, since I don't really think anyone will be able to get all the details right. But I think I have a pretty good idea of what's possibly coming up. To start, I imagine the Presents will open with some mobile game updates, like Professor Sada and Turo coming to Pokemon Masters, and maybe a few new friends coming to Pokemon Sleep, as well as a plug for the Pokemon Go Tour event, featuring Unova Pokemon the weekend after the present. I personally don't think we'll see some of the older mobile games, since I can't imagine that those are being actively supported anymore. And while I don't think the Pokemon Company is going to come out and say, we're done with Pokemon Cafe Remix, I also can't imagine that they'll keep adding content to a game that's simply phased out of popularity, if it was even popular to begin with. As far as Pokemon Go goes, it's possible we'll see a new announcement trailer for something in it as well. I imagine this one will be on the smaller end though, to not overshadow the Unova Tour. I'd think something like another Gigantamax Pokemon coming to the game. However, I think they're wanting to focus on the Unova Tour here, so we might not see any extras at all. The last Pokemon mobile game that I imagine we'll see here is Pokemon Pocket and Pokemon TCG Live. As far as Pocket goes, I imagine the next mini set will be teased or a new Pokemon Day event will be announced for the game. Truthfully, I'm a bit iffy if we'll have a mini set shown off at all, since we know the next mini set is about a month away, and Pocket hasn't announced info for another set coming out more than a week in advance in the past. But this could be an exception since there will be so many eyes on this broadcast. As far as TCG Live goes, I'm sure they'll do a quick announcement for a special promo coming to the game to celebrate the holiday. But I'm really hoping for some kind of single player patch or switch port. It feels like the game's really lacking in content past being a TCG simulator, and its predecessor had a good amount of free-to-play missions to teach you the game and different deck archetypes. As far as the switch port goes, I'm not sure how confident I feel in the TCG Live team handling the console version. But I really miss the Pokemon TCG Game Boy games, and it's kind of a bummer that we don't have some version on a console. I really doubt it'll happen since I feel like TCG Live is kind of a doomed project, both due to its scope and quality, but I'd like to see some kind of improvement come to it. For our mid-show announcements, I think we'll get some peeks at upcoming animation projects. I think we'll probably see some kind of sequel to Pokemon Concierge, as well as some trailers for the upcoming anime season. I know Japan is supposed to have a really crazy episode scheduled for Pokemon Day, where the Shiny Zygarde and Shiny Rayquaza fight, but I'm not sure if they would spoil that for overseas viewers or just do a quick trailer. I think we'll also get an announcement for the next batch of Pokemon coming to Pokemon Unite. We already know Suicune is dropping Pokemon Day, but normally Unite drops 3 or so Pokemon together over the course of about a month and a half. And then, they don't really drop anything for a good while, to let the competitive scene breathe. Truthfully, I'm not sure what Pokemon we'll get in this batch, and I haven't played Unite in a few months. But, knowing that we're going back to Kalos soon leads me to believe that we might get a Pokemon from there, like Heliolisk, Florges, and Noivern. Those all seem possible, but truthfully, I'm not too sure. I think Flygon, Baxcalibur, and Hydreigon are all notable fan favorites missing from the game as well, so I assume we'll get some combo of a Gen 6 Pokemon and a popular pick. I'm very sure we'll see some Pokemon Scarlet and Violet news here as well, probably announcing an Outbreak event with more frequent shiny Pokemon, as well as some Terra raids. I've seen some people speculate that they're gonna give us Iron Crown and Raging Bolt raids back, and while I think that's a possibility, truthfully, I find it kinda boring. I'm hoping we get some of the events that tie into upcoming Pokemon. Maybe they'll announce Xerneas and Yveltal raids, as well as them being transferable to Scarlet and Violet when they drop. I think that seems more interesting to me personally, but I also really don't want to deal with Terra Xerneas and VGC, so I'm a little bit mixed on that one. And finally, for our last part of the presents, before we crack out the fun stuff, I think they'll do a quick blurb about the physical TCG, or at least show off the trailer that we saw at Worlds last year again. Journey Together is about a month out, and the set has a lot of hype around it, as well as the Team Rocket set releasing after it, with other fan favorites like Ethan from Gold and Silver, as well as Cynthia and Misty. For upcoming announcements, I think we'll get a trailer for either Pokemon Gold and Silver remakes, or Pokemon Black and White remakes. I'm a bit mixed on this one, since normally a Pokemon remake releases every other generation. Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out in Gen 4, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were in Gen 6, and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were Gen 8. That would mean that we're not due for the traditional Gen 5 game until Generation 10 is out and about. I think they could fill this gap with a Gen 2 game, since we saw Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee break the cycle back in Gen 7. Johto is also technically the region that players haven't been to in the longest, since Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out before Black and White, meaning that younger players new to the franchise, or players just new to the franchise in general, have probably never been to Johto. I think this would also line up pretty well with Pokemon ZA coming out this year, since there's a good amount of Mega Pokemon discoverable in both Kanto and Johto, compared to the Pokemon that you can catch in the main storyline of Pokemon Black and White. A Gen 2 remake would also include Kanto in some form, I'd imagine, so that's a big plus too. Regrettably, I do imagine this game being another Brilliant and Shining Pearl moment, where Game Freak does pass it off to Ilka to do a direct port of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, with a new layer of paint. This would make a lot of sense, since Ilka was already working on porting DS games to the Switch, and they have an engine to do it in. I'd hope for a graphical and stylistic upgrade, but truthfully, I really didn't hate Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl past the fact that they were lacking new content, or even Pokemon Platinum's content. I think if Ilka takes steps to add new content, side missions, and post-game goodies, this Gen 2 remake could be really exciting to dig into though. However, if we do see a Gen 5 remake, which is also possible, I'd imagine they'd also wrap it up in the chibi, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl style, which would be a big shame in my opinion. Gen 5 was known for both pushing the visuals and audio quality of the DS and the Pokemon series as a whole. I think cramming it into a LEGO Duplo art style would be a big shame. And I know this point's been echoed by a lot of people online, but if we were to get Generation 5 remakes this year, I'd hope for an HD 2D look, or at the minimum, some kind of 2D graphics for our art direction. I think Gen 5's storytelling and attention to detail goes above and beyond, and I think the art style plays a big part in that. Seeing how expressive the Pokemon sprites are, how the world changes around you with the seasons, and the huge explorable caves and buildings wouldn't hit the same in 3D. And I feel like it'd be a big waste of Pokemon's most celebrated generation. I think this line of thinking can also apply to Generation 2 remakes, but since we have both the original Gen 2 titles, being Heart Gold and Soul Silver, already available in 2D, it would probably feel weird revisiting that region for a third time in the same format. One clue we do have, however, pointing to Gen 5 remakes is a card set launching in Japan later this year, featuring all the Unova Pokemon, launching early summer if I remember correctly, but I'm not too sure. This could point to Gen 5 remakes coming out around that time, since Japan normally has a card set launch alongside a game within a month or so of its release. This does feel a bit telegraphed by the Pokemon Company to me, but who's to say? While we are on the topic of a Gen 5 port, I'm not sure if we'd get a Black and White 2 port with it. I don't think we'll get the games bundled together, but I can imagine Black and White remakes coming out early summer, Legends ZA dropping early spring or late summer, and with Gen 10 probably coming out in the first half of next year, I don't think that we would see Pokemon Black and White 2 remakes before then, meaning they'd have to come out after Gen 10, but probably before Gen 10's DLC. That seems like a big stretch and a lot of mainline series titles all in quick succession, which I'm sure they'd want to sneak in non-mainline Pokemon titles as well in those years. Speaking of non-mainline titles or spin-offs, I think we might see some kind of new spin-off here, instead of a paired remake. I don't think it'll be a new mystery dungeon, since I think they'll want to save that for the Switch too, but I think that Project Synapse, which leaked in the Terra Leak last year, would be a great fit instead of a remake, since we know that's a co-op focused game similar to Splatoon. Truthfully, I don't know a lot about this title, but I think there's a really high chance of it coming out this year instead of the Ilka remakes I mentioned earlier. This would line up with the pattern I mentioned earlier too, that remakes only come out with every other generation, and also would give players something new to hold them off until Generation 10, which is probably being pushed back as I mentioned. I think this game would shake up the Pokemon content lineup a lot, and if it really is some kind of multiplayer, team-based PvP title, I think it'd fit really nicely launching in this year, with the competitive circuit starting next year, since I imagine Pokemon Unite only has a year or two left in it for official competitive support. Speaking of spin-offs and rumors, I don't think that it's likely that we see any ports of the GameCube games. Recently, Nintendo's been filling the gaps in their release schedule with ports while the Switch winds down, so I could definitely see them bringing over these GameCube Pokemon titles within the next 2 to 3 months to fill release gaps until possible remakes, spin-offs, or Legends ZA. The one doubt I have about this theory, however, is that if we are getting remakes this year, as well as Pokemon Legends ZA, I really couldn't imagine them squeezing in another big launch title, as well as a Switch 2 and whatever games come out with that. Meaning that these GameCube ports would have to happen ASAP. And as we know, when games are getting ready to launch, they normally leak a little bit early, which hasn't happened yet. This obviously doesn't mean that we won't get a port like this, but I find it a lot less likely than an ILCA title being paired with Legends, similar to Legends Arceus's launch. Another port rumor that I've seen being passed around is ports of the first 3 generations of Pokemon to the Switch. And while I think this one lines up nicely with the idea that Pokemon ports will get launched in the last legs of a system's lifespan, I'm not sure if it would come out this year instead of last year or next year. This year, we were already guaranteed to get a big game, and we're probably going to see a remake or spin-off like I talked about. So why would they also port 3 generations worth of games within the same year? I could have seen them doing this last year, since we didn't get any new Pokemon titles then, but they didn't. So I'm not sure why they would hold them until now, especially considering Pokemon's 30th anniversary is next year, meaning that there will probably be a big push in nostalgic marketing. I imagine if we do get these ports, they'll either be in a collection or released throughout the year in 2026, but I can't imagine they'll choose to do it this year to finally pull the trigger on these long-anticipated titles. Getting back to what I think we will see this year, the presentation will obviously wrap up with a Pokemon Legends ZA trailer. I think we'll get a look at the starters, a few overhead shots of Lumio City, and an introduction to at least 4 or 5 new characters. If I had to guess, this game will take place in the future, after a catastrophe, or in the past, since Xerneas and Yveltal only show their 100% forms every 500 years according to the lore in Pokemon X and Y. I can't imagine this game taking place in present day due to that, since present day in the games is when Lysander awoke them early, and we just have the normal versions of Xerneas and Yveltal featured that we already know. The only way I could see this game being featured in present day is if there's a heavy time travel theme involved. But even then, why would we need to rebuild a city that's already bustling and fine as is in modern day? It just seems a little bit off to me. If I had to give a definitive guess, I'd guess these games will take place about 250 years ago, and feature the previously mentioned new forms of Xerneas and Yveltal, as well as a new backstory for Zygarde and some of the weird loose ends left in X and Y Answered, since there's a few things in that game that don't quite add up. As far as Mega Evolutions go, I'm pretty sure that we'll see at least 2 or 3 new ones here. Mega Pokemon are a big marketing moment for the Pokemon Company, so I think we'll see at least 1 weird one highly requested one, and a new Kalos native one. For a weird one, I'd imagine a Pokemon like Stunfisk, Magnezone, or Victory Bell would be great contenders, since I think they diverse expectations and catch players off guard. As far as a cool one goes, I think we'll probably see a big fan favorite, like Flygon, Lycanroc, or maybe even Haxorus. These are all likely, since drumming up hype for a new game takes hype marketing, and I think any of these would do the trick. Finally, for a Kalos native Pokemon, I think we could see Sylveon, Florges, or Aegislash getting a cool new Mega. I think it'd be a shame if Kalos Pokemon weren't highlighted here, since the game revolves around their homeland. But I could also imagine them holding off on so many Mega reveals to guarantee that they have good marketing material to spread out over the next few months. To wrap up the trailer, I think we'll see a glimpse of whatever the new A Pokemon is, since we don't know it yet. And it seems like a pretty big part of the game, with it being in the title and all. That just about wraps up our presents, but obviously I didn't mention Generation 10 here. Truthfully, I don't think we'll see Gen 10 launching until early next year, and I really don't think they want to put Pokemon Legends and a new generation out at the same time, having them compete for sales. I also imagine, after the unfavorable reception from Gen 8 and 9, that the dev team is wanting extra time to get the titles ready for a full launch. I imagine these games will release in early 2026, but this prediction does worry me a bit, since Pokemon VGC would be missing part of the season if it launched too late into the year. All in all, these predictions are just guesses, so let me know what you think I got right, and where you think I got it wrong. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back later this week with more Rivals 2 content, as well as hopefully some kind of video or stream reacting to the presents. Hope you're all looking forward to it as much as me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now!